Here on The Colour of Country Life, it's good to catch up with Jeff Bourman. He's from the Eastern Victoria seat in the Legislative Council, but there are candidates for the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party throughout Victoria. Jeff, you're seeking a third term in the Parliament. What are you hoping to achieve in your next term?
Yes, Ricky, thank you for having me on, but I am having another swing at it. And look, I'll be honest, I don't think what I wanted to achieve will ever stop or ever not be in need of protection. And that's basically things like the rural and regional lifestyle and communities are just being under attack for different reasons. Timber being one of them, or the shutting down of the timber industry. We have the Latrobe Valley in my area, which is undergoing significant challenges, and it needs people to be able to stand up and have a go for them, as well as the shooting and fishing and farming and all those other things. I originally started in this 8 years ago, and my main focus was protecting the rights of shooters. And it has grown so far beyond that into basically trying to protect, well, what's not the city, in effect. I'm still obviously well attuned to the shooting thing and the fishing and farming thing, but it's blown up into something that I could never have imagined. And I think I need to be there to at least continue the fight, win, lose or draw.
Now, just a bit on your background, I notice you are, among other things, a former police officer yourself, so you come at this also with some experience in the law enforcement area when it comes to firearms.
That is correct. And one of the things, I mean, let's be honest, it was 22 years ago now, but one of the things that I remember clearly, and I was a law-abiding shooter back then, before, during and after being a police officer, is how little that the registered and licensed shooters impact day-to-day society, yet how much effort is being put into regulating them. Now, you could say chicken or the egg, but the reality of it is those who have gone to all the trouble with getting a license and the delays and background checks and so on, and then having a safe at home to put your firearms in, they're statistically irrelevant as far as a problem in society. So every time something comes out, and let's go back to the ridiculous lever-action shotgun debacle, that was nothing but someone's, pardon the expression, brain fart at a federal level, which then they got all the states to agree with. And then all of a sudden it was forced upon us. But for what? There's no demonstrable outcome except to make 1880s technology in some instances the same as what people call assault rifles now, but semi-automatic centerfires. It's just one of those things that illustrates the problem we have in society. What sounds good is not necessarily actually correct.
And Jeff, that was your experience as a police officer back then, but you're saying even in the Parliament today, there's an inordinate, or certainly maybe in the police force or law enforcement, there's an inordinate amount of energy expended on firearms?
Well, on law-abiding firearms. When it comes to criminals with firearms, have at it. I support anything that will only affect criminals. I've been a proponent since long before I even got into the police force of, if you commit a crime with a firearm, legal or otherwise, but if you commit a crime with a firearm, there should at least be a multiplier on your sentencing to make it clear that using a firearm to commit a crime is viewed poorly as opposed to just a normal sort of crime of violence. I think the way it's treated now, more effort has been putting into taking down people for, well, let's just say, having their gun out of their safe because they're a farmer and they leave it by the door in case there's a snake. More effort's put into that than into having I suppose recently it's changed, but a dedicated task force for criminals only. But to be fair to the police, I think they have done that fairly recently. But I've been looking at this. I've been shooting since I was 12 and I'm now 55. And that's the first time I remember ever there being a dedicated task force.
Now, Jeff, you talk about regulation there. An area that's heavily regulated now is forestry and native forestry in Victoria. I think you've even shared an article recently in social media about how there's claims by some that it's contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. What's your view on the future of native forestry across Victoria?
Sadly, Ricky, the future is dim, but not because there's a problem. It's dim because we've got these inner city latte sipping, Chardonnay swilling people that watch National Geographic and vote for the Greens, putting pressure on the government to end an industry that is highly regulated. You could say over-regulated, but highly regulated. It is very, very efficient. I think only 6% of public land in Victoria is available for logging, and only 1% or less than 1% is actually logged. And if you will, it's logged in a rotation basis where every 80 years you get back to where you start. So the trees someone planted 80 years ago, someone will be cutting down. Now, people talk about carbon capture and all this and that. Clearly, everyone has their diverging views on this, but clearly if there is any validity in it, growing more trees to me would seem to be a good way of capturing carbon. There's so many things that are good for the timber industry in the middle of a global shortage, mind you. I just don't understand why the headlong rush into finishing it off.
Yeah, it does seem odd to me that you can't get a credit for all the years the tree was growing before you harvested it, and somehow yet it's bad for the environment. Jeff, something else I can't figure out is metropolitan Victorians in particular seem to be in a rush to vote back in the Andrews government. We spoke with you during the pandemic powers extension. You didn't vote for that extension of pandemic powers. Just what do you make of, I guess, even the call from one of your colleagues, Tim Quilty, MLC, that we should have a royal commission into the handling of COVID-19 in Victoria?
Well, there's a couple of issues in there, Ricky. One of them is the return of the government here. I try not to get too bent up into, funnily enough, the politics of the major parties, but I think when you look at it, a government that has, more issues than a beaten-up old rusty Holden is going to be returned in preference to the opposition. It says something. That so much went wrong, and yet they're going to be returned to power. I don't know if that's a city versus country thing. I don't know exactly what's going on, but that's democracy, for good or bad. Moving on to the Royal Commission, I actually think there needs to be a federal Royal Commission into the whole thing, not to point fingers and make blame, but to see what went wrong, because things clearly did go wrong, but what could be done to avoid those in any future pandemics. Now, all things being equal, let's hope that we don't have another one of these sorts of pandemics for another 100 years. But the reality of this global village thing is if someone gets a cough in a country 16 hours away, in 16 hours they're in Australia, spreading whatever it is, and I think these things will become more common, and we need to look at how we can deal with them without just locking down the entire state or country as the first port of call. We have a economy and people's basic freedoms of movement, but we have them to consider.
Well, as a result of all of those restrictions and what was done in the name of COVID-19 over the last few years, you now have an eye-watering amount of state debt. I think Victoria's state debt's more than 3 other states in Australia. Does there need to be some sort of investigation into just how the government maybe got it so wrong that we have to spend so much to get Victoria back up and running? And it looks like a lot of it's going to be sent in Melbourne on a suburban rail loop.
Well, there's two different things there. The expenditure for the COVID, which was helped along with the federal government at the time. But yeah, I think a lot of the debt will be basically infrastructure. And do we need to spend so much so fast? Well, I personally would say probably not. The suburban rail loop, it's an investment in the future, I suppose. I think there's been enough money committed now, would be, negligent possibly, to back out. Look at the East-West link, which I still think should be constructed. That cost $1.2 billion to not build a road. I don't like seeing that sort of money wasted for nothing.
And I guess the point you made about democracy and people will vote, the majority gets their will, which is fair enough. But as we've seen during the pandemic, especially in Victoria, a great number of people shifting out of Melbourne into, areas nearer to Melbourne or even further afield and preferring a regional lifestyle. Aren't we going to just see investment now from Labor in places like Ballarat and Bendigo, or do we need to see the fair spread across regional Victoria?
We absolutely should have a fair spread. It's ironic that the two areas that you mentioned are one of the very few Labor, I won't call them strongholds, but Labor has a very good representation from there. But you look out east and places like that where Labor don't have a representation, or it's a basically safe coalition seats. That's where more money needs to be spent. And I'll also put it on the coalition for not spending enough money out there when they do have the opportunity. One of my favourite sayings is, where's the worst place to live? And it's in a safe seat. And that's because whoever it's safe for doesn't need to spend money, and whoever it's not safe for won't get anything for their money, so they leave it. And I think that's part of why the Latrobe Valley in particular is just feeling the pinch.
Yeah, and Jeff, you've got also in the Latrobe Valley massive changes going on with energy, with the mothballing of coal-fired power there, and gas to a degree as well. This shift to renewables, shifting the energy burden in some respects further west in the state. What's the feeling on the ground amongst your voters there about the change away from coal in Victoria?
I think to say they're livid is an understatement. I think one of the problems we have is how now coal is being treated what nuclear was in the 80s, that there is no possible way forward with coal. But I'm going to put to everyone else that's cheering the downing of the coal industry and the way renewables are going to take over everything. They're all going to be feeling a little unhappy when on a 45-degree day, when everyone's got their air conditioners on, and all of a sudden the air conditioners and the lights go out, because it's either too still or sometimes the solar cells can get a little hot. It's not capable of providing a baseload. And even if they do decide they're going to put back their energy generation from coal, it'll take 15 years from the day they make a panic decision to do it to turning on the lights. I don't know why we have not started a serious investigation into nuclear energy. It's different to the nuclear energy of the 60s, where people were building the power stations in places like Fukushima on the shore, right near the ocean, in a place renowned for tsunamis. The Russians won't be building things like Chernobyl, which was substandard. There's a whole lot of stuff that has actually been improved over the years, to the point that we should be actively at least investigating nuclear, or else one day all these people that want all this renewable energy are just going to be sitting there in the middle of summer or the middle of winter, and all the power goes out, except for what they may or may not have on their roof.
Now, Federal Energy Minister Chris Bourman was in Question Time on Tuesday poo-pooing nuclear power, claiming renewables are the cheapest in the nation, and yet Daniel Andrews wants this target of, I think, by 2035, 90% of Victoria's power coming from renewables, and yet right now it's usually about 65 to 70% of the nation's energy mix comes from coal from Queensland and New South Wales.
Yeah, I don't get it, Ricky. I really don't get it. We know that the combustion of something creates gases. We know that digging a big hole in the ground doesn't look good. But I do have to say, when there's a city of getting towards 6 million people, one day when there's insufficient energy, it all starts going downhill. I don't know what they're going to say. We need storage, and people can build batteries, but that's no different to digging coal out of the ground. You're digging lithium and all other sorts of stuff, and then you have the recycling of the batteries to worry about. We just seem to be, at best, we're just handing one problem over for another.
Well, Jeff Bourman, it's been good to talk to you, and I know you've got candidates running in other parts of the state. More information is available on the back of your ute, vicsshootersfishersandfarmers.org.au. Jeff Bourman from Shooters, Fishers and Farmers for Eastern Victoria, thanks very much for joining us today on Flow.
Thank you very much for having me, Ricky. Much appreciated.